Hey there, this is Bram Kanstein, and in this episode of Bitcoin for Millennials, I'm talking to Brian Rothenberg. He's a brand new Bitcoiner who went from 0 to 400 plus hours of research in just 35 days after one interview with Michael Saylor triggered something in his mind. He went from owning 0 Bitcoin to now being all in, and in this conversation, we explore his rapid journey and what drives his remarkable conviction as a new Bitcoiner. Brian is a great communicator, and I think you will love this conversation. Now let's dive into it. Well, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sending me an amazing message about your very quick journey into Bitcoin. And I'm very happy to chat with you because I shared this message on X, and it seemed to resonate with a lot of people. So I'm really excited to dive into your experience of going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole in such a quick way. And in your message, you mentioned that you saw Michael Saylor on a podcast. And I was just thinking maybe we start with what was the moment during this Michael Saylor interview that kind of like broke through your skepticism and made you think, wait, maybe Bitcoin is actually a thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the thing that I remember most about that interview, which I've watched a couple of times since, is just the fact that he's been doing an arbitrage on the US dollar for 4 years, and that resulted in the stock price for Strategy sort of going up by 3,000%. And I'm just like, that shouldn't be something that can happen. And so, with his conviction that he was talking about with regard to Bitcoin and everything, I needed to do some more research. So definitely started looking at other things that, other interviews he's done, other videos he's put out, and that leads you down the rabbit hole very quickly. And so it was interesting to me because I think the podcast host, it was a, traditional podcast or something. It wasn't a Bitcoin podcast, but the host did not seem overly convinced by the end of the thing, but was friends with Michael for a long time. So, had him on his podcast for that reason. But I'm definitely thankful that happened to me. And within a couple of days, I was moving money into Bitcoin already. And it also caused me to read Saifedean's book the next day, basically in full. I listened to the audiobook. And so that gave me the conviction. Yeah.
Nice. Which podcast was it? Which episode?
It was an interview that Michael Saylor did with Prof G, which is Scott Galloway's podcast, Prof G Pod, I think. We can find it. I can send it to you if anybody wants to watch it. And I'll also say, having watched like probably 100 hours of Saylor now, that it's probably not his best interview. It just was enough at the right time for me, right? And I think that that's really the key for a lot of people, the right information at the right time when somebody's going to be receptive to it.
People asked on Twitter, like, do you know which episode it was? And so I thought it was like the podcast with Tom Bilyeu, Impact Theory. But this one is even better, I would say, because I think Prof G is a normie expert, let's call it like that, right? And he talks a lot about finance and money and wealth and stuff like that. But he totally does not understand Bitcoin, even after, because I've watched this interview too. Even after this interview, like he's not convinced, like he just doesn't get it, and maybe that's a nice follow-up. Like you said, you listened to him and his strategy, and you said like this wasn't really supposed to happen. Were there like any things that before Bitcoin clicked for you, like any frameworks or narratives that you were using to try and make sense of economy, finance, building wealth? And what do you think either Saylor's strategy or eventually Bitcoin did to challenge that? Like, what made you go, I'm wrong, basically?
Yeah, so the first thing is I think that I had a thought always that I was falling behind in a way, right? So sort of the melting ice cube without being able to put your finger on what was melting, or the fact that, there was this ice cube that, could be, I guess, manipulated in some way, if we want to call it that. And so, while I have a great job and I even have a second job that produces extra income, I just felt like, I was still falling behind in some reason. And it's not even like keeping up with other people or anything like that. It's just sort of making sure that I was comfortable that way. And one thing that I put together in my head, and I'm not exactly sure when this happened after, seeing that interview and reading Saifedean's book, but, technology, I know reflexively is supposed to be deflationary, right? but why is the price of everything going up worldwide if technology is supposed to be deflationary, right?
Exactly.
These things
Yes.
should not happen together. And it's sort of two thoughts I think I had in my head at the same time, but not physically, I guess, at the same time that I could connect together. And so once I started sort of putting those pieces together, that there's something there that clicked for me. And I've tried to better understand, I think, the Federal Reserve and monetary policy and economics from that perspective. And I've read a few books about it, more specifically in the past. And it just still felt like, oh, well, you just don't get it, right? Because there are these smart people out there who understand more than you. It may be that, Occam's razor affects it more, right? The simplest outcome is the most likely one. And I think that that's what, listening to several people talk about this, right? I remember hearing an interview that Larry Lepard did with someone, certainly saw, an interview or two with Lynn Alden as well. And you start to see multiple people saying similar things, but from different perspectives and for different reasons with slightly different variations on those things. And I think that that's really sort of helpful to give you the framing. And, at the end of the day, number one, too, also a lot of your podcasts and interviews were really helpful to me. But everyone in Bitcoin says, do your own research, right? Don't trust my word for this, which is not something that you usually get from economic policymakers and central bank chiefs and economists and other people, right? Like you'll get it someday or you just won't, but don't worry about it is usually sort of the tacit answer there.
Yeah, they're using their authority, right? Like they're trying to strengthen their talk by having a certain type of authority, right? And the goal is for you to just not think further than whatever their statement is. But I love that you highlight this. I mean, you know that I talk about it like this as well, right? Like I think eventually it is just so rationally simple that is why it's hard to understand. Like everything else you have heard has been obfuscated, complicated, abstracted, and told to you by people that have authority or some sort of label. But I agree, when you hear different people say the same thing from their own perspective and their own experience, the common thread is, and I have the book right here in Dutch, right? Yes. Technology is deflationary, period. That's how it should go. That's how it's always been, by the way, right? The first cars were crazy expensive. The first phones were crazy expensive. The first computers were crazy expensive. So we know that it goes like this, but we are now in this space of time where, you've heard the podcast, right? Like I use apples and bread as an analogy. Yeah, like does it take more energy to grow an apple? Like no, but why is the apple more expensive, or the eggs or stuff like that? And it's just not logical. And I think that is just the realization that someone must have. It's not logical. Okay, why is this happening, right? Like it's simpler than you think, but you've been, kind of like bamboozled to think it's way more and more complex, where, I found it to be way more simplistic than I also thought beforehand.
Yeah, and just to build on that point too, there are some things, if you have assets, for example, that, are appreciating in value, in dollar terms. So it's sort of like you're getting ahead that way. But in reality, are they appreciating in value, or is there just a greater supply of dollars or fiat currency out there, which is causing prices to go up, right? And even if that's the case, it's not like we're getting double-digit increases in wages and salaries for the most part, right? There was probably 1 year in America, post-COVID where that happened, but otherwise it's, 2 or 3%. So only people with assets are, increasing their wealth in various ways. And even then, it's probably not overall. And, how close, I forget, it might be Larry who says this, but how close somebody is to the money printer seems to matter a great deal, right? And that's not something that I, want to believe in or really take part in if I can, figure out a better way. And, once people were talking about Bitcoin in a way that I would understand, that was really, key for me. I think another point to just go back to, which is important, I thought before this that I knew that Bitcoin was just sort of like every other crypto out there, because I had read several books purportedly about Bitcoin or touching Bitcoin, and they never really touched Bitcoin, right? They were about FTX or cryptos in general or things of that nature. Books like Number Go Up, books like Going Infinite and Easy Money, but they really did not dive into any of these economic issues. And I think that that's really important for people to understand, because I didn't think I came at this from a standpoint of non-understanding when I didn't believe in it. And, I believe today is day 59 for me since I saw that Saylor interview. So it's still very early, right? Yeah, but to think about it, 60 or 65 days ago, I thought I had done my homework and determined that this was not a good currency or not a good, investment. And I even told one of my colleagues at work who was asking me about investment probably 90 days ago, that same thing. And then I had to retract that with him. And luckily we did that before we saw some of these price movements recently, because I would feel bad about saying, get out of this, and then changing my mind because of more research, right? And it's tough.
Yeah. Bitcoin custody is evolving, and OnRamp is leading this change with multi-institution custody, eliminating single points of failure. Instead of relying on one institution, OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a cold storage multi-sig vault backed by 3 independent custodians, where no single party can move your funds alone, providing an unprecedented level of security. Your assets are protected by a 100 million Lloyd's of London insurance policy, with all transactions fully auditable on-chain and only executed at your direction. This means complete transparency and control over your assets at all time. Beyond custody, OnRamp provides comprehensive Bitcoin services that include trading, lending, inheritance planning, and IRAs. You can view them as your private Bitcoin banking partner tailored to your wealth preservation goals. Whether you're new to Bitcoin or an experienced holder, OnRamp's approach helps you secure your generational wealth with unmatched security and peace of mind. You can sign up at onrampbitcoin.com and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, to receive $150 in Bitcoin after your first deposit. If you first want to learn more, you can also book a free consultation via their website to speak with one of their Bitcoin custody experts. Tell them you came through me, and they'll take extra good care of you. Bitcoin is financial sovereignty, so why compromise when you need liquidity? Meet Debify, the Bitcoin-backed lending platform made by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. Debify connects you to institutional-grade liquidity and allows you to borrow fiat or stablecoins, all while keeping your Bitcoin 100% under your control with a non-custodial 3 out of 4 multi-sig escrow solution. Get competitive rates from a global marketplace of institutional-grade lenders, with loan terms that you choose, from 1 month up to a year. There are no hidden fees and there is no rehypothecation, just pure Bitcoin-aligned lending with the highest level of transparency and security. Are you ready to unlock liquidity without ever selling a single sat? Go to debify.com/Bram, that's BRAM, to check out their current lending offers. That's debify.com/Bram. Yeah, I love that you say this last part, because that is the humbleness, right? Like Bitcoin humbles you is just getting to the point that to just really be honest and tell yourself, I have no fucking clue what I think about this. You know what I mean? Like, right. I have an opinion, but when I'm really honest, I know that I didn't do the work. You know what I mean? Like, and once you do the work, you just realize, yeah, I didn't know anything, which is, I'd say, a very positive moment. Hopefully, I mean, it was that in my experience, but that just shows you that there are many things actually that you just do without really understanding why, like I think that's the rest of the rabbit hole of Bitcoin. Well, maybe we'll get there, but yeah, I love that you say that, because it's just very important that when you realize that, you also know that you have an assignment, and the assignment is to do the work, basically.
Absolutely. And also, I think within the community, there are a lot of people who, I don't want to call it dogmatic views, but have very strong viewpoints. At the same time, I strongly feel that if something better came along, or there was a problem with the system that was identified, most of the people who are studying Bitcoin and believe in Bitcoin are open-minded enough to start looking into those things rather than just reflexively parrot back pieces of it. They may do that initially, but most people want to understand what is going on with everything within Bitcoin, especially those of us who talk about Bitcoin rather than just sort of passively invest in it. right? And I think that that's really different from a lot of other things where people aren't always willing to keep an open mind once they felt like they've done the work or made the determination there. And so, again, you're right. It challenges a lot of, assumptions and beliefs. And there have been a number of people you've had on your podcast that I've watched that had different, political views or personal views on a number of topics. But with everything, there's both a strand of authenticity in what they're saying, but also a kernel of truth in what led them in that direction. So while I sort of may want to reflexively disagree with that, it also leads me to have to think more about it and delve deeper rather than just reflexively say that they're wrong, right? And I haven't done all the research on everything that I may not agree with, but and those are usually other things other than Bitcoin, just to be kind of clear about that. But it does, to your point, go back and humble you from the things that you were assuming to be true or taken for granted within your own framework. And I think that that's really important.
Yeah, fully agree. And so this is day 59, but in your message to me, which was, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks ago or something, you mentioned you did 400 plus hours of research in 5 weeks. And maybe you mentioned it already, but what were the most mind-blowing concepts for you that you uncovered, and which ones were the hardest to accept?
It's a great question. I'll say for me, I think that I had been searching for answers to questions that I didn't know both the questions nor the answers. So really a lot of this was just, I was ready for it. I was primed for these things. But one of the things that I remember seeing, and I've shown to a couple of people, is that chart of the M2 money supply that I think the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank puts out, and just seeing that, the number of US dollars in the system has increased by 40% since COVID. And before that, it, basically doubled since the financial crisis in 2008 in America. And, that's a huge amount of, liquidity to put into the system, let alone what we're, doing now. Also, as I was looking at these things, it was right around the time that, the tariffs were coming on, that interest rates were high on the U.S. debt, and, the national debt and deficit are basically at all-time highs forever. And so, all of these things are just lining up almost perfectly for me to see them, right? It's sort of like, somebody's pitching a perfect game in baseball. We were talking about that slightly before when we started this. Somebody's pitching a perfect game. It also means the hitters are probably not hitting the ball in stride and everything like that. So, in terms of the concepts, the important ones, I think number one, 21 million Bitcoin is, really, really key compared to everything else. It makes it that scarce asset, and really understanding that gives you conviction in this, thought up internet money in some way that some people would refer to it as, which I wouldn't. I think that the decentralized nature of it as well is also quite important. And again, as much research as I might have done on the Federal Reserve and, currencies and things like that, I didn't know what a 6102 attack was before I started doing the research. And so thinking about how just the US government has acted in the past, and then also seeing, what we did more recently, with Russia and some of their assets and things that we didn't do during World War II, makes it a little bit scary for the dollar as a global reserve currency, more so than sort of, America or something else. I am American, and I'd say that, I do love my country, but not to the detriment of every other country in the world, right? I want us to be doing the right thing. I want us to be that, beacon of light, that beacon of hope for other nations to hopefully follow, and for us to set a good example. And we've had lots of examples of times where we didn't do that. Trying to bring it back around to Bitcoin as well, though, for me, the number go up pieces of Bitcoin are really important, but people get it wrong. It isn't the Bitcoin number going up. One Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. It's the fiat money supply from all countries that are going up, right? It's sort of flipping these things on their head in some ways. Same thing for, quantum computing. People worry about quantum computing, right? And when you think about that, what's the threat vector? You've talked about, I think, the cobalt that the banks are, using from the 70s in terms of the code that they're built on. Is that an easier threat vector for quantum computing, or this,
Yes.
hash rate and everything else that I still don't completely understand, but I know that it's a much more difficult, problem to solve for a quantum computer. So, certainly if the asset base within Bitcoin is, $40 trillion, which is going up by 20x from where we are today, maybe that would be a better threat vector or something like that. But at $2 trillion today, probably not. Right?
Yeah.
It's just kind of each one of these dominoes falls in favor of Bitcoin as you start thinking about them and, going through everything, which is just kind of, fun to see after a while, especially when you've been searching.
Yeah. I love that you just said that the US national debt is at an all-time high forever. That's a great one. That's really great, and I think that's just mind blowing by itself, right? Last week we saw Scott Bessent say the U.S. will never default because we'll keep on raising the debt ceiling. That's literally what you just said, right? And he is serious about that, and just that is. I think huge signal that could trigger people. Was that like a chart or a metric that made you go like, okay, this is mathematically obvious that fiat money is broken, or was there anything that kind of underpinned that understanding for you as well?
I mean, I'd say probably it's just going back to the infinity number of fiat that, they can hit the money printer, make it go burr, however people want to say that, versus the 21 million supply that we know that we're going to have in Bitcoin, and everything else flows from that. So while, the national debt and deficit I see, as numbers there, it's just sort of a part of the system, at least in my mind, right? It's not the key thing. But for me, if the cost of everything in my life is going to continuously go up, and it's really going to go up by about what the returns of the stock market, where I had most of my wealth parked before, I'm just going to be treading water at best. And there's also a chance that I lose, right? That the ice cube melts and I don't have as much as I had before. And that just seems obvious that you'd want to get out of that trade if you could find something better. And so the other thing that I was going to mention before that people have talked about is, Bitcoin is this Ponzi scheme, right? And this is something that I think a lot of people, especially in the one interview with Scott Galloway that came up, was it seemed like a Ponzi scheme what Strategy is doing here. Like the new money is pumping the bags of the money that was there before. And I didn't mention this, but accretive dilution was also sort of a term that I'm like, wait, dilution in a stock shouldn't be accretive. You shouldn't be able to go out and immediately buy an asset with, stock that you just issued and have more assets for all shareholders as a result of that. And so, again, if you look at sort of definitions and examples of Ponzi schemes, I bring that back to the fiat system, right? They're the ones that are really just shoveling more stuff in there without there being any tangible additional benefit. And, again, I'm willing to say that I'm wrong about, what Strategy is doing and how Bitcoin works, if I find out more information. But it seems to me that, Saylor has described this as, would you rather take in capital from investors and spend 5 years planning a building in Tokyo and then 5 more years building a building in Tokyo and then spending 25 years collecting the rents from that building in Tokyo to get that recoup on investment? Or can we buy an asset that's, a hard money that's better than gold immediately with that money? To me, that reflexively makes sense, and why accretive dilution is a thing for not just Strategy, right? There are, half a dozen or a dozen stocks now. There's one every day coming out that are talking about doing the same kind of treasury strategies. So these are just really interesting ideas, but they make sense. And, as people talk about Bitcoin sort of eating the rest of the capital pool, there are people that I have a small business with a partner, right? Like we're trying to sell that. There are people who won't buy that business just to store their money somewhere, to, not even want to have the type of small business we have, but like they know that they can't just shove money under the mattress. With Bitcoin, we can shove Bitcoin in a cold wallet and put it under the mattress or wherever we want to hide it for 20 years, and it will be worth more. we haven't seen that before, and that's huge.
I absolutely love what you share here, right? I think the main thing I would love to touch upon is that the problem that you explain, and I think that's what everyone should understand, right? The problem that you explain is the problem that everyone has. Literally everyone has that if you are not into Bitcoin. And, what you said about, I don't want to tread water. I don't want to own melting ice cubes. Like that is the number one self-interested thing that anyone should realize.
Right.
Like why, like you just said, like you have a business. I don't know if you like doing the business or whatever, but if you don't like what you're doing, then at least make sure that the reward that you're getting for that is stored in something that is not being debased. Just thinking about, what am I doing to store my wealth? Do I understand what I'm doing? Or is there someone else who's telling me what I should do, right? What do I think of their advice? If I don't want to do the work and study and understand, can I actually complain when I'm not, keeping up with inflation, like stuff like that. I don't know, maybe it's a certain way that our brains are wired and we are lucky. But for me, I don't know. This seems very logical, rational, like the whole self-preservation idea.
It does. And I think this is something else. And one of the reasons why I think I reached out to you initially too is I think one of my takeaways is I got the right information at exactly the right time. Like there's that, parable or whatever it is that, a man standing in the river at 2 points in time, it's not the same man, it's not the same river.
Yes,
and so,
yes, yeah.
You really need to get the information, I think, in the right way at the right time. And it can't all come. I think we've all probably had that. And, even in 59 days, there are people that I'm trying to talk to about Bitcoin and some of these things. And, it's just sort of like they glaze their eyes back at you. And so it's really, I think, important that we try to figure out ways to make these principles, I guess, smaller and easier for people to digest. But to your point, not stop talking about Bitcoin, right? The way that I will present it to someone will be different from the way that you present it to someone. Same
Yes.
Concept. Like I could almost copy you verbatim, but they hear it better from me than from you. And that's going to be really important for everyone to start realizing some of these problems. And that I think, in the long run, and I'm not saying that it's, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, but in the long run, however long it is, we need to individually meet people where they're at so that they start thinking about these things or stop just, accepting certain principles to be true. And, I was sort of generally fine having a lot of my wealth in the US stock market for the most part. I actually had it globally diversified. And I know people still like that today, that they would never put it in Bitcoin, like, there's no value there or something like that. What is the thing that they're going to need to hear, and who are they going to need to hear it from to start questioning whether that assumption is correct from their part, right? People, at least in America, we talk about this betting on, the fact that America is still going to be here and that we're going to be the strongest economy in the world. And I think that there's probably a good chance that both of those things are true, but not, a 100% chance based on some of the things that we already talked about. But what makes that more true in time? If we have this debt problem, if we have this deficit problem, if, the rest of the world has similar problems and, are sitting further down, further away from the money printers because of the US dollar dominance, what does that mean for everyone? And so, as we start to think about these things and how people, to your point again, are going to rationally act as these things happen, it's really, I think, important for us to kind of think about that and try to figure out ways to explain these things to people in the ways that they want to hear. And it could be just somebody says, my stocks are not doing well enough. It's all the Mag 7. They're not going to do this because the AI is played out. Maybe that's the gain for them, right? Look at what Bitcoin has done. Look at the, 60% returns historically over time. Zoom out for 4 years. You have a long investment horizon. Maybe that's the right thing for that person at that time rather than some of these other factors. And so I don't want to call it an echo chamber at all, because the other thing about Bitcoin, Saylor says this, but like it's the most interesting thing in the world. There are so many aspects of it that you can study, right? There are so many parts to Bitcoin to understand how it all works that even if I was 6 years in, it probably wouldn't make me, fully expert in all parts of it, right? People really specialize in certain aspects of how it works. And, talking about, core and knots, right now, and all of those things that are going on in certain, parts of the Bitcoin ecosystem, there's a lot there, right? And there's a lot of historical, precedents for forks and things. I just scratched the surface of that stuff. I don't even have time or knowledge to dig into those things, but I know that they're still happening. So it's exciting in some ways too.
If you want to self-custody your Bitcoin stack, I recommend the Blockstream Jade Plus. I've been using this premium Bitcoin-only hardware wallet for a few months now, and I love its design and ease of use. What makes it stand out is its open source hardware and software, and Blockstream's unique genuine check, which makes sure that your device is authentic. No backdoors or compromises. You can connect with the Jade Plus however you want. Bluetooth, USB-C, or you can go fully air-gapped with its built-in camera for cable-free QR transactions. The metal case feels solid and the color screen is easy to read. And it connects with your favorite Bitcoin apps like Blockstream Green, Sparrow, and Electrum. Get your Jade Plus today at store.blockstream.com and use code BRAM to get 10% of your entire order. Let's talk about something that not a lot of people think about before it's too late. Where are you storing your Bitcoin seed words? Are they truly secure? I found my solution with Stampseed. It's an elegant all-in-one titanium plate solution with no separate pieces to lose or manage. Your seed phrase gets permanently stamped into pure titanium that withstands fire, survives water, and lasts for generations. Unlike shallow etching methods, Stampseed's patented tools help you to deeply stamp every letter for permanent readability, protecting your financial legacy. When you order a titanium seed plate from Stampseed, you can also upload a custom design or your logo to customize the back of your plate to make it fully personalized. Paper seed phrases are a disaster waiting to happen. Secure your Bitcoin with Stampseed for decades to come. Visit stampseed.com and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, to get 15% off your order.
Yeah. Well, I agree, and I love that you are starting another podcast. Like I am trying to meme into existence. Don't stop talking about Bitcoin. You're a prime example of that. So again, thanks for sharing and thanks for coming on. Like I think that sets a great precedent, and hopefully it inspires other people to talk about Bitcoin in their way. Like that's literally what I'm doing here. Like I'm just talking about how I view it in my journey and my reflection, and learning from my guests along the way as well. Still, every recording I learn something new as well, and I think that is just very exciting. So I applaud you starting a podcast yourself. I was thinking when you said, like you need to be, you heard the right information at the right time. I'm thinking about there's a book behind me called the Kybalion, and in there they say, when the ears of the student are ready to hear, then come the lips to fill them with wisdom. Like you need to be ready. Like, before most people go all in with Bitcoin, they kind of flirt a bit, they buy a bit, they see it go up or down or whatever, they follow it, and then their interest gets piqued. You basically moved all your investments within 3 days after, of course, doing this study. What gave you like the conviction to take a leap instead of like crawl or do DCA or whatever? Was it that, and this was my experience, so I'd love to hear if maybe yours is similar. For me, it was just like moving to another system. It was like, I'm in this system, I don't understand, I'm being debased, I'm just moving into this other system. So kind of like seeing it as storing or saving and less than an investment, I just want to share like how I did that, and I wonder what it was for you.
Yeah, I think that that's really it. So I am still in the accumulation phase of my life. So I do DCA into Bitcoin as well. But really it was like, probably the analogy of the melting ice cube, right? If I'm leaving all of this money in the stock market, like the debasement of the currency along with price inflation, that happens because of the way that the credit-based system is working, means that, if I'm trying to get 10% a year, they're probably going to, inflate and debase 10% a year. So I really need to get 12, and I don't know if that's guaranteed. Whereas, one Bitcoin will be one Bitcoin, and over time, the Bitcoin value in dollars will be, a better store of value and probably, appreciate in value, against the dollar, against a house, against, other types of assets or needs that people have. And it just, again, sort of clicked. And I was searching for an answer to the problem, right? So, we kind of mentioned this before. I have a business with a business partner. That's just mostly an investment, right? To diversify things. I don't run that with my business partner day to day. I have a regular, we call it a W-2 job in America. I work for the corporate man, a private equity group, basically. And then I have investments in the stock market as well. And I just felt like something was wrong. And this sort of solved that problem for me. This isn't, and this is probably important to say, I did buy a very small amount of Bitcoin and ETH sort of on the recommendation of an investing podcast I used to listen to, not so much because they believed in it or understood the product, but because if it does shoot to the moon, do you want to have not been a part of it, right? It's the same reason I bought a very small sliver of like global bond indexes within my portfolio to say, okay, well, now I'm invested in everything, right? So I had a little bit of everything that was sort of investable in the world. How much allocation, it was never going to make a meaningful difference, but sort of, diversity was supposed to be the only free lunch in investing. That's sort of something that traditional finance says. But, people who've ever made wealth in investing took, sort of very pooled, very concentrated shots on certain things because they felt like they had asymmetric information. I'm not saying non-public information or illegal information, just asymmetric, right? And so one of the things, we didn't talk about since I've reached out, but I actually was able to go to the Strategy World Conference and go to Bitcoin for Corporations down in Orlando. I live, when I'm not traveling at my parents' house here in New York, I live in Florida about 2 hours away. And I just felt like, I would probably regret not going and just watching the videos online. But being around other like-minded people was, I think, really helpful for some of those things. But just hearing these things also from, Michael Saylor directly, from Fong Lee directly, from hearing from the MSTR True North crew, as they're, presenting information about sort of how they're thinking about this and what's happened over the last, 2, 3, 4 years. Again, reinforces the principles of some of the things that we're trying to do here. And, really all we're trying to do is look out for ourselves, I think, individually, but not necessarily at the expense of others. And that's another part of Bitcoin that we haven't even talked about, which is like, it's not, heads I win, tails you lose kind of thing, like it almost is in the, traditional finance system. We can all win with this because it doesn't have to be zero sum in the same way. So there's a lot of, cool things that come out of this as you think about it in time.
Yes. It's a mutually beneficial system for money, or I think Jeff Booth said cooperative competitiveness. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, and just going back to something you said, your example of you're going to start, this business with your friend, and then you're going to evaluate 6 months later if you're actually adding value to the world and everything else. And, you can objectively decide that you're not. I mean, to be able to walk away from something that you try without saying, oh, we didn't work hard enough, or, oh, this just takes more time, or whatever it is, that there's a better use of time and capital, right? So,
yes.
You can evaluate it in a much better rational way than most. So,
yeah. I love to highlight that. Yeah, because eventually it's about your time, right? Like you have a limited time in your life. What do you spend it on based on what decisions? And I think that's an interesting just mental model or circle of thinking or a loop that you can go through constantly, right? And you have to try stuff to be able to gather information to then reflect and make that decision. But I think it starts with being conscious about what you actually decided. And then, you can figure out, what am I learning here along the way? And then you can think about, okay, what do I actually think of it? And then adjust if you want to do that or not. So you went very rapidly into this. My experience now talking to you seems like you really get it. So kudos for that. Like amazing. I love to hear that. I can imagine that people in your circle, your family, friends, have noticed this Bitcoin awakening. How have they responded in the shift of thinking? Or are you now the annoying guy that says, all the problems in the world are downstream from the money? Like, how is it received?
I think that the people that I've shared it with, and I don't want to say that I'm keeping it tight, but it's still been less than 2 months overall. So there's only so many times you can talk about things with people. But some friends sort of, I don't want to say they're skeptical, but it's sort of like, okay, that's interesting. Why? And then recently, because I was home for Mother's Day and I'm visiting my parents, and I'm worried about their melting ice cube, right? Because they're not continuously working. They're in the spend down phase, and they're spending faster than they thought they would, both because things are more expensive, but also there were more things to pay for.
Yes.
I successfully orange pilled them in just a matter of days. They do not understand this, but I think that they understood, number one, my belief in this, and then some of the pieces of something is wrong, this is not going to last, right? So again, none of this is financial advice to anybody who's watching, but I thought, some of those products that Strategy was putting out with those, preferred shares like bonds would be appealing to them. You can get 8 or 10%, which is what we were aiming for with their stocks in the US stock market without, having as much downside risk and things like that. And it turns out that they were more interested in actually buying some Bitcoin and actually buying some of the stock and seeing that appreciation. So they kind of put about half of what they had in US stocks into Bitcoin, 25%, and the stock of Strategy 25%, and we also put some into a couple of other dividend paying things to help with some of the finances there. But for now, based on what I know today, I'm really excited about that because that went better than I thought it would and went quicker than I thought it would. I thought that this would be something that I'd be lucky to get them to make a change before the end of the year, in December.
Wow.
And again, if people are watching, they probably understand something is wrong, right? And so, talking about it, not like orange pilling people, but just trying to respond to the specific things that they bring up is, I think, really vital and important. And hopefully you'll catch somebody at the right time in the right mindset.
Amazing to touch upon this topic of retirement, right? Like I'm of course I'm focused on millennials because I think there is no retirement for us. Like you really need to understand that and act upon it. And I think Bitcoin is the solution for that. But yes, even if you're in your retirement now, you have a set amount of dollar units, I always say, right? And you don't really know how many years you'll have, right? So you have to kind of like budget or figure out, okay, this is how I'm going to spend it. But yeah, once you realize that you have this melting ice cube, for them the problem is even more profound and clear, right? Like their use case is literally, I'm living off the amount of money units that I have right now, and I'm trying to mitigate the debasement, etc. Wherefore, like younger people, like millennials, it's still very conceptual, right? And I am trying to figure out like how do I talk about this, and I think that's an ongoing process. But I love that you did that for your parents. I mean, I'm having the same conversation with my mother, who is I think a bit younger, but she once told me, like I cannot really change it. I hope the money is there too, but I don't really know. And that's just messed up. It's really messed up, and I think, yeah, great. Again, kudos for fixing that, I think, yeah.
And there's a couple of things like just to point out. Number one, we're in a unique time. So I am very lucky to have found Bitcoin when I did, because most of that left tail risk that people talk about is gone, right? And so, with Fidelity and BlackRock and, all of these treasury companies starting and the strategic reserve and other countries buying, the idea that Bitcoin's going to go to zero is almost somewhat unthinkable in some way, shape, or form at this point in time. So it becomes less risky to put money into this asset. It still may go down quite a bit. But people who watch things understand what's going on. My parents understood that they're printing more money or that they're going to, right? That wasn't a shock to them. It's just, that's how a credit-based system works in their mind, and they didn't take it one step further to think about what that does to purchasing power and the cost of everything. And once you point that out, I think that that's where, again, a missing piece to that sort of thing that people have been thinking about on their own. So, it's highly surprising to me. I put a post out on X about it, I think last night, that said, yes, we made the change and it took 3 days, but, they don't understand Bitcoin. Like, they have not gone down the rabbit hole. I gave them a couple of books because they're readers, but it will be time that will be there. But, they trusted me also to help them with their finances because I like reading about personal finance and investing before Bitcoin. And so, the fact that I did this probably also spoke volumes for them that way. And I assume it's probably the same a little bit for your mother, right? That, there's some trust in what you're doing, but it seems risky to me, but like, we'll continue the conversation.
Yeah. Same. I agree. And so in your research, you really went deep. And I can imagine that along the way you were like, okay, yeah, this is really it. But were there any anti-Bitcoin arguments or sources that gave you a pause or made you doubt your new thesis or understanding even briefly?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of any, and none main come to mind. There is always an argument that somebody will make that one of the altcoins out there, just to be charitable in terms of the names, may have more benefit in some way, right? That it takes up less energy, which again is debatable about whether that's a good thing, or is proof of work better than proof of stake, and what if something happens on the blockchain, and how much can we do? Why do we have to have level 2s for, Liquid and Lightning and, even level 3, methodologies for Bitcoin that we wouldn't need on other types of coins? But none of them really, at least for me that I can recall, took any traction. Like, I've never thought about selling my Bitcoin so far. And it actually sort of bothers me because, if you start, as some people talk about, I think Jack Mallers is the first one I heard talk about it in this way, but living on a Bitcoin standard, at some point you will probably have to sell some of your Bitcoin, because if you're saving in Bitcoin, savings are meant to be spent at some point. And I don't mean our long-term savings, but if you convert pretty much every fiat dollar you have into Bitcoin, you have to spend that at some point. And this is what a lot of people find difficulty with in retirement. And I'm finding this as well, because I'm going to have some expenses coming up next month. And I think I'm going to have to sell some of my Bitcoin, but it's almost like I don't want to. They're my little babies and all of those types of things. I see that the number is probably going to continue to appreciate rather than go up, but this is going to be a pivotal year. So, it's going to be strange to talk to people in 3 or 5 years and say, yeah, I was the Bitcoin class of March of 2025. And you're like, oh, wow, you like nailed the timing on some of these things, just the way that it looks like. And it's happenstance, right? It really is happenstance. I wish it wasn't, but because I would have rather been in 2024. But, everybody, finds Bitcoin at the number they deserve, I suppose, which is another thing that sort of resonates with me. And it will continue. So.
Yeah, maybe to highlight that for 1 second, like there's these memes like everyone gets Bitcoin at the price they deserve, have fun staying poor, everyone gets Bitcoin at the price they deserve is, I think, actually very positive, right? Same as with have fun staying poor, it's like positive. It's, if you don't do the work, this is where you'll end up, it's kind of like meant as a trigger. The price that you deserve is the price at which you finally figure out that you are participating in a financial system that's not designed to benefit you, and that realization is not nice, but it's incredibly positive. So maybe you can elaborate a bit on that, like why you said that or how you think about it as someone who's new to Bitcoin.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the way I would think about it is like, people keep saying that the people who are in Bitcoin today are still early. And I think that we are, if we think that it's going to $1 million or $13 million, or even more than that, against the dollar. One of the things we have to remember when putting those numbers out there, the other side doesn't think that the dollar is going to get debased in the same way that we take for granted on that trade, right? So at Bitcoin at $1 million, it is likely that, in maybe today's dollars, that it's really, the value of the dollar's half of that or a quarter of that in some way, shape, or form. It depends how fast it's going to happen. But when it's $13 million, you're not going to get $13 million of purchasing power today. I'm not going to be able to buy a $13 million mansion, say in Miami, or a penthouse in New York with Bitcoin at $13 million valuation, because, at that time, $13 million will be worth less. But everybody's got to be on their own journey to get to this. And if it all happened tomorrow for some reason, then there'd be a lot of problems in society, right? Like, we can't change the societies that we have that quickly in some of these ways. And I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not a futurist. I don't have enough sort of mental depth probably to make those types of predictions, but I don't think that we've really thought through what's going to happen as some of these changes occur, with the financial system and, the value of Bitcoin over time, as we're kind of looking at it. But somebody posted, I think it was yesterday on X, this really long piece about basically this guy who's a millionaire and sort of what his journey to Bitcoin will be over time, right? So, one of his friends says, oh, you're going to be poor because you don't have Bitcoin. I have one Bitcoin. The guy doesn't buy any. Then 5 years later, he's like, oh, my friend is now, richer, Bitcoin went up, so I'm going to buy just a little bit. He buys 5%, and then, 5 years down the line, the price appreciates, so he's happy. And then 5 years down the line, the price drops a bunch, so he's unhappy. And, in the end, the point of that thread, and I forgot who, put it out there, was that this is going to be the experience for a lot of people, right? That they are going to ride the Bitcoin train in the way that you and many others have who've been in this trade much longer than me. They're not going to come in with the conviction that I came in with. You probably came in with, more conviction than will be average. And what I mean by that is, like, it took you some time, and then you basically, moved to being on Bitcoin. A lot of people are going to hedge their bets there because this is uncomfortable. This is upsetting the entire system that has been underpinning probably the way that they built wealth. Like, that's true for me.
Yes.
And I think that overall, us Bitcoiners, like, this is so rational. Why would you do anything else? But it's going to be very difficult. Right. And I think that, part of this is, like, people who grew up, say, in a certain religion, right? If they're Catholic or Hindu or Muslim or Jewish, to convert to another religion based on the principles and the tenets of the religion rather than for other reasons, I think is very difficult. Probably easier to, convert somebody who's agnostic or, something like that. And that's really what we're probably talking about overall for many people. And so, I think a lot of these things are underappreciated. What I think that I'm seeing is the institutions are going to drag everybody into this much faster just because they're going to have allocations there, right? If, as people are talking about, strategy gets put in the S&P 500, I would imagine there's a lot of people in Europe who are investing in the S&P 500, as well, in terms of funds and things like that in some ways. So everybody's going to have a little Bitcoin in their portfolios as a result of that over time. Lots of, interesting threads to pull on as you get here. And that's why, as Saylor says, and I already said, Bitcoin is probably the most interesting thing in the world, because it's not just like this single-sided thing like a bond or a stock or even the US stock market. There's so many things that we could talk about that we won't have time for. So,
yeah. Well, that's why I said, like, I'm still learning new stuff even after 10 years. And it's really rewarding. Like, it's just fun to just be continually surprised about what this is, what it could do, how it works, So yeah, I love that reflection. Thanks for sharing that. So if you could go back and give yourself advice at the very beginning of your journey, like, what would you say? Or perhaps, like, what would you say to someone who is at that moment where you were 2 months ago, even if they think that they are smart, skeptical, financially literate? What would you say to them?
Can you, I think it goes back to principles, and I'm going to butcher this, but, Richard Feynman sort of, has talked about trying to teach concepts. And if you can teach a concept, then you probably really understand it. So, as I was investing in that system, go take it a step beyond the diversification and the U.S. stock market and, investing in, the U.S. economy, and say, what are you really investing in, and what are the threat vectors to that investment? Have you really thought them through? And then do the same comparison for Bitcoin. Do it for ETH. Do it for everything. But really try to dig deep into that and be cognizant of the areas that you don't know. the areas that you're unsure about more information, and then go find more information. Don't just listen to, Brahm or Brian or other Bitcoin podcasters. Go talk to the guys who are, out there singing the praises of Solana or Cardano or whatever it is. Talk to other people who say that all of these cryptocurrencies are going to zero and they're worthless, and figure out what will solve the information puzzle that you put out there for yourself, right? That's the key thing. None of us are saying, trust me with this. And that's another difference. When you get traditional financial advice, yes, this is the way it is. If you'd like me to explain this to you in a complicated way, I can do that. But it's almost patronizing. Never heard anybody in Bitcoin try to do that, right? Like, they might say that this is complex. I'm going to try to distill it down, but like, it's more complex than that. And like, go do your own research kind of thing. And you just don't hear those things. So I think, again, just going back to, what am I investing in? What do I believe about those things? What are the threat vectors against that? And how does that compare to other things? Is something that if people actually do, I think that they will surprise themselves by which questions they can answer and which questions they can't.
Yeah. Yeah, the message is always study Bitcoin, right? It's not buy Bitcoin. And if you're listening to this and you think like, okay, they're talking about this, don't believe us. Just invite yourself to do the work, right? Or take on the invitation of doing the work. And I agree, you will probably be surprised as you were and as I were, that I really didn't know what I was participating in. And that eventually sent me further on this path of actually trying to figure out what money is and wealth and capital and all these things. And so I think that's great advice. And so we talked about being more personally responsible in a sense, like reflecting on, why am I doing what I'm doing, or why did I make this decision? Did I actually do enough work to make this decision in a conscious way? Do you think there is some sort of shift that, when you get into Bitcoin, gives you, an invitation to be more personally responsible, or even, have a spiritual shift? Have you noticed any areas of your life that changed since you went down this rabbit hole?
Yes, for sure. And I think that it may not be sort of the spiritual shift in the way that, it has been for some others that I think you've spoken to and I've seen you interview or talk to on your podcast, but more so just going back to, I don't even want to call them first principles, but what do we know to be true in our minds? And did we actually put together a framework to say, I believe X, Y, and Z, and here are the reasons underpinning that? And here are the arguments against, and this is the reasons why I dismiss them, right? Again, there are different things that I can say about, I'll just use other cryptocurrencies as an example. I haven't done enough research to confirm I'm absolutely wrong about all of them, but I think that there are better sort of key tenets within, Bitcoin. And that's sort of enough for me at the moment. But questioning that, people talk about the food supply, people talk about COVID, people talk about, other things that governments and individuals are doing, the idea that, Bitcoin is going to end, wars and strife amongst the world is, something to dig deeper into. But it's just, again, going back to challenging many of the assumptions that we may have taken for granted and not thought critically about on our own, because we were sort of told that that's the way. And most of us don't like to believe that other people are leading us astray, right? Even if you compare this to people who follow cults or cult leaders, the people following the cult think that they're right and that the leader has their best interest in mind. And we might dismiss that in various ways. And I would not call Bitcoin a cult, by the way, because usually cults have a leader and they have disproportionate power. I don't see disproportionate power in Bitcoin, but, you want to make sure that you're thinking through all of the assumptions that you're making and that you have reasons and rationale for what you're doing. And I think that in all aspects of my life, I'd like to do more of that, right? As I find time and as I find a need to do that. So that's, I think, the big change for me is just not taking things for granted that.
Yeah. So when you look ahead, let's say 5 years, how do you imagine your relationship with Bitcoin evolves, like personally, professionally, maybe even philosophically? How are you looking towards the future?
It's a great question. Depending on how things play out with, Bitcoin in the next few years, how long I want to work, is a question, but it's also, similar to you, I think, what can I do within Bitcoin? Because it is exciting, it is interesting, right? I have a job that I don't overly enjoy my job, but I don't hate my job like a lot of people do. There's some fulfillment from it, but I still work for someone else, and there are still aspects of that I don't like. And so the question becomes, when can I transition out of that? And seeing things happening at Bitcoin for corporations, at Strategy World. I've also decided to go out to Vegas again, just because, like, why wouldn't you want to experience that? If you're new here. But like, there are opportunities that are building every day. Like, people are talking about on X, all of these companies that are talking about Bitcoin treasuries, they're going to need 2 or 3 people each to run their Bitcoin treasury strategy, right? There's reporting that's going to need to be done. There's the buys that need to be done. There's, documentation. There's, regulatory issues. There's all sorts of, things that are going to come up in this new economy. And I don't know that blows my hair back as much as trying to help more people adopt this, right? Like, you can go the corporate route, which is important for institutional and corporate adoption, or you can think about, how are people going to interact with these things, right? Like, how are people going to start living on a Bitcoin standard and find it easier and more beneficial than doing what they do with their bank accounts and their credit cards and living in a debt-based society, right? So I think for me, I'm curious to see where my journey goes, but like, again, being on day 59, it's really hard to say, okay, I'm going to make this shift soon. But I don't see myself in 5 years working in a same or similar job that I am today. Like, I will either be, working for myself or doing something probably in furtherance of Bitcoin, unless something changes. And this is the last thing too, the open-minded nature of this, right? Like, this could change, maybe there's a change somehow in, one of those other coins that make it more suitable to everything than Bitcoin. I keep that open. Maybe there's something that changes and Satoshi's wallet, opens up and this, goes to zero, which, even if that happened, I don't think Bitcoin would go to zero, but things will change as part of that. I don't just assume that this is right and that my thought process won't change down the road. But it is exciting to be in 2025 in Bitcoin. And again, a lot of those risky things that people were worried about the last few years seem to not be there quite as much anymore. Like, we're just seeing more adoption. It almost looks like a one-way street, with Bitcoin at the moment. And that's got to be a big change for you, because you've been in slightly longer, just seeing that, compared to 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, the signal is way stronger than 4 years ago or 2017. And I think that's also how it goes, right? This is a 1-by-1 conversion, in a sense. Maybe that's a bad choice of words, but like we said, or like I said before, like, sell for what? Once you understand that this is the most superior monetary asset to ever exist, that you can also verify yourself, then yeah, what are you selling your Bitcoin for? I think for things in your life, right, like you are contemplating now, like, and that is the whole point of money, don't you think? So I think eventually it is okay if you need to fix stuff in your life and you sell Bitcoin for that. It's going to hurt a little. I mean, I've sold Bitcoin to buy a car. I've sold Bitcoin to buy headphones that are now like $20,000, and they already broke along the way. That's all part of it. But I think eventually it will help you appreciate more what this actually is. And I think that is what strengthens conviction towards the future, and also invites people to just do real work, add real value to earn money, to earn Bitcoin, to be able to save in Bitcoin, right? So maybe even, in your situation where you are kind of like forced to use some money to pay for whatever you need to pay for, maybe next week you think like, hell no, I'm not going to sell Bitcoin, and you're going to hustle and get money in another way, in a valuable way, right? Like, just by adding value, like, okay, how can I earn money now so I don't have to sell the Bitcoin? Like, that is exactly like the kind of incentives that many people are talking about, right? Like, just directional focus and attention and energy towards delivering value in the real world, so you can actually save in money that isn't debased.
Yeah.
I think that's just the use case, you know? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think there's always going to be an opportunity, right? I saw your interview that you did with Simon Dixon, and I think Simon said, he's purchased Bitcoin at $3 and basically everything since then. I had a friend when I was in graduate school in 2011 ask me if he could put a mining rig in my house because the electric company was onto him for his usage. Had I thought, because he told me what he was using it for, to mine Bitcoin, had I thought or, contemplated doing just a bit more research, I could have been that early, right? I could have been in Bitcoin 14 years ago. It wasn't the right time. I thought he was a little nuts, as a person generally. So this wasn't kind of a thing that I wanted to get into, but it didn't even occur to me to see what he was doing or look into this thing at the time. And so, everybody's probably going to have a story about that, but don't look back, just look forward. And, Bitcoin enables you to have a better forward-looking view of life. Somebody always got in before you did. Satoshi got in before everybody. And, that's always going to be a thing. So, how does this help you move forward, I think should be the key takeaway for people as they look at it.
I love that, man. Well, to wrap up, I want to ask you the last question, and I ask everyone the same question. What is a core belief that you will never let go of?
It's a great question, and I should have been prepared for this, but I'm not. I think overall that, no matter who we are or where we're from, most people want a good life for them and the people they care about, and they want to be good to others. And, systems usually incentivize us to go away from that in some way, shape, or form. And I think that there's a good chance that Bitcoin changes that for everyone. So I hope everybody kind of ensues good intent, certainly from me, but also for people around us until things, tell you otherwise. But hopefully, as we change the system, it will move us in that direction even more.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for sharing. Thanks so much for coming on. And I really enjoyed it. I think this is a great conversation that anyone who's even remotely thinking about Bitcoin could listen to. So thank you so much for sharing. And man, we'll stay in touch, and I'll see you soon in Vegas then, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for having me on, and thanks for all the things that you put out there, because that also really helped me with my journey.
Appreciate it, man. Happy to have been able to help you out along the way. So thanks. Cheers.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, please like this video if you want to help shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, and subscribe to my channel to stay connected. I hope to see you for a next episode. Bye.